Hey, everybody. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. We're delighted to be bringing you a bunch of good content this weekend. And by design, we're really trying to mix it up and have a variety of different inputs, not only from the literary field, but really from the artistic field. And so it's with great personal pleasure that I welcome back a good friend and an artist that I've admired for well over a decade. And I've talked to him quite a few times, and actually in some formal settings, talking about the kind of things we're going to talk about tonight, which is how the industries, both music, literary, and other, are in a constant state of change. And basically the key takeaway is no artist in this day and age can afford to be aloof. There's increasingly a need to be hands-on. And Jon, as you'll see in a moment when I introduce him properly, is really the perfect person to give us perspective on how things have changed and how, if one has the inclination, one can take the reins and really make a difference, both for their art, but also the medium. So this session is entitled The Noisemaker from New York City, which is not as tongue-in-cheek as you might think, because Rashanim, one of the many bands Jon masterminds, in Hebrew translates as noisemakers. So I figured that out probably in the early 2000s when I first discovered Jon's music, playing with Rashanim. And I think the first album I heard was a tribute to John Zorn, one of our mutual heroes. And that started the journey of my stalking him as a fan, and then our friendship. So let me introduce my friend, brilliant musician. Jon Madof is a guitarist, composer, and leader of the bands Rashanim, Zion 80, and others, and he's performed extensively with other artists, including the aforementioned John Zorn, Matisyahu, Mark Ribot, and Frank London. And I have to say, in the Wikipedia page, so it's true, Sean Murphy has said, quote, "Yep. All his products thus far have explored traditional Jewish sounds with a skillful blend of surf music, thrash, jazz, and calmer acoustic. Each successive effort has seen Madof stretching and pushing himself farther, in as well as out, utilizing exotic instruments, and feeling is always at the forefront. In 2017, Madof and frequent musical collaborator Shanir Ezra Blumenkrantz founded Chant Records, the self-proclaimed sonic temple for adventurous music, which aggregates and amplifies the work of an international community of artists pushing the boundaries of music across many genres." So those of you at home thinking, wow, exactly. Jon, welcome. Apologies for the lengthy intro, but there's no way to do it quickly because you've got a lot of irons in the fire. Welcome, my friend, and how have you been?
Thank you. Great. Good to see you again. It's been too long, way too long. Yeah, no, it's good to be here. It's a crazy time in many ways, but also an inspiring time, I think, for artists. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you and to be here.
Well, let's just get right into it, because you, yeah, like you and I both know, because we've talked about this. You know, I think we've actually been kindred spirits in a lot of ways, in part because we both embraced. I think both of us were, and you much more so than me, but had the technical savvy or background to at least not be intimidated to the extent of paralysis by the fact that circa, say, 2010, maybe a little bit before, a little bit after, there was a definitive change. And I think we both have celebrated that art and the means of both creating and disseminating has become increasingly democratized. And that's a wonderful development. However, it's incumbent now on the artists to control some of that, which means they have to at least be remotely comfortable navigating this world and being willing to wear a lot of hats. So I think you are genuinely a case study. Talk us through how you went from being really, I mean, I can't say analog because it was CDs, but an old world musician, yeah, touring and making CDs, to running a record label. You know, get us from there to here, and you know, tell us how it was done.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear you say that, because in my experience, musicians, at least in my community, tend to see the technological changes as like completely negative. And then I'm always like, yeah, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And then eventually they'll concede that it's like, there might be a little opportunity, you know, but maybe me, because I'm in my 40s and a lot of the musicians I work with are, let's say, between like their 30s and 60s. They're kind of like, yeah, but I don't know how to do that. And I don't know. I don't think that the world is that much worse off. I don't think it's that much worse to be an artist than it was 20 or 30 years ago. That's my take on it. I think it's different. I think there are opportunities, like the biggest one, like you said, democratization is huge. And I always think of this great, I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary called Downloaded about Napster.
No.
It's really good.
Okay.
It's funny because Netflix has weird things with their algorithm, but I saw it on Netflix years ago, and then it wasn't there, and then somehow I found it again, maybe on Amazon or something, and I watched it like when it came out 5 or 6 years ago, and then much more recently, about 6 months ago. And there's a great quote, I think it's on the Daily Show when Jon Stewart was hosting, and he said it was some story about Napster, whether it was like the Metallica lawsuit or something else, and he was like, oh, apparently musicians think that like or the music world is upset because Napster is ripping musicians off. And in truth, only record labels are allowed to rip musicians off. You know, and so, I think there are a lot of ways to look at it, and it's in our best interest always to look at things in as positive a light as possible, not as far as deluding ourselves, but as far as like, what's the actual playing field and what can be done to further art and what we do in our community. So that's kind of my thought on that, just jumping off what you said. But as far as my kind of career goes, I mean, I feel like I definitely, probably people in our general age range, no matter if you're a filmmaker, a writer, a musician, visual artist, I think we kind of have straddled this like not pre-digital, I don't know what you would call it, pre-online world, and have, come into that having our previous experience be selling physical CDs and books and, mailing postcards and things like that. So when I started I started playing music professionally when I was in high school in the 90s. And that's what we would do, copy tapes and 7-inch CDs, 7-inch vinyl. Yeah. My band had this, we paid extra to get blue vinyl of our 7-inch, which I still have a box of in my house. And then, like you said, around 2010, it just all like, I feel like for a few years, like it was kind of like, every time I thought about it or looked about it or talked to anybody about it, I'd be like, what's happening? What's this Napster thing? And then by the time I knew what it was like over. Yep. And then I heard about Spotify and I'm like, I'm not using that. That's weird. And then at some point I realized like it was unusual for me to go to a store to buy a CD. Like that was some weird thing that is not happening anymore. Maybe it's having kids. My kids were born between 2005 and 2009, and they're like, digital natives. Like, sure. I've had to explain like not only a record player and like a phonograph, but like a CD, a physical object that has music on it. He's like, what do you mean? Music is on here. It's on my phone. It's on the, and that's, I mean, I think it's been hard for everybody, but I think once I started to see like what YouTube was and the potential power of it as a platform, and also the potential negatives, but like when I started like, oh my gosh, like I can go and look up every Frank Zappa solo and somebody's going to teach me how to play it, and rare, whatever footage of Hendrix rehearsing or sure. my Ornette Coleman, like anything. Yeah. And then started to see that, and then that kind of spread to, wait, I can sign up for Spotify and hear like anything I hear about anywhere. I can just look it up on Spotify and listen to it. So there's that, as I guess that's more of like as a fan and as a listener. And sorry, this is kind of all over the place. You've probably talked to me enough to know that, like, it's like you ask me one question, I answer 9 other questions, and then it's like, oh no, you asked me this question.
No, you contain multitudes. Let them spill forth.
Okay. You asked for it.
Right.
Well, in 2000, my wife and I moved to New York, to Brooklyn. And I think you and I probably met in like 03, 04, or 05, something like that.
That sounds right.
Yeah, which is a long time ago. And in 2003, I started working with John Zorn with my trio, Rashanim, like you mentioned. And I put out a bunch of records with him. And then all the way through, I mean, the last one I did with him came out last year, but through a few different bands, and I played on like a film soundtrack with him. But then at some point, and it's been amazing working with John, and it is amazing working with John, but at some point, like, Shanir Blumenkrantz, my music and label partner and very close friend, we're always talking about, like, you know, that there must be a way to put out music that serves our community, that like meets several criteria.
Yeah.
That is going to help us get a new audience, and that is digital and on the streaming platforms and helps our community. And this idea of a record label started to take form several years before we did it. And then when we did it, it started to seem like we said, well, it's going to be a lot less expensive to put things out digitally. And that mattered a lot to us because we weren't starting with any investment. We weren't, and we knew that our model had to have very, very low overhead. We were willing to put, you know, the blood, sweat, and tears into it, but like didn't have a lot of seed money available, a little bit. But, you know, a lot of that went into like forming an LLC because a bunch of people told us, like you said, like, you can't just be like whistling, walking down the street like, oh, I didn't know that if I do something wrong, I can't get sued and my mortgage would be at risk, you know, or like some horrible thing like that.
Sure.
So, you know, I have like an accidental background in technology. Like I just kind of fell into it from my day jobs that I've had. I was lucky, like no ingenuity or anything of my own. I got a job like doing publicity for a theater, and then they needed a designer. So I was like, I'll take an earlier Photoshop class, and I did print design. And then they were like, well, we need somebody to update the website. And, you know, fast forward, and I'm still in a position where I have a day job for the steady income and with the family and everything like that. Yeah. And it's in technology, and I was able to use that to bring that to the label. And that's kind of the end of the business that I work on, from social media and promotion and publicity to like digital distribution. And I made and update the website and things like that. And yeah, so I can go more into the label or the technology stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, so I think what you have really articulated, even though you think you were going a lot of tangents, I think what you just did, right, is in less than 10 minutes, you really did take us on a tour of how the industry has changed, but also how it really is a combination of having the skills or learning the skills. But I feel comfortable emphasizing and flattering you, but saying, whether it's a musician watching this or a writer or a wannabe critic, you know, it's always been thus, but more so now. You'll notice what John was just saying. He learned web design. He took it upon himself to do Photoshop. So some of these things are not pie in the sky, like to advance your artistic career so much as you can't afford to be, unless you have the money to pay for marketing and design, you better have some good friends, or you better have some hands-on ability. And I say that not to discourage anyone. I want to encourage anyone. I think the whole point of this conversation is that it's never been easier to get your stuff out there. And just looking at books for a second, never mind the music industry, Amazon, you know, never mind them, the pros and cons. The fact remains, you could theoretically take a Word doc that's on your PC today, and that book, however lousy the quality and however lousy the design, could be a book that you could sell on Amazon tomorrow. So the middleman has been taken out, and it's never been easier. But now what I want to shift into is, you had the druthers and the drive to go for it, but that wasn't easy. And there's a million different concerns, right? Like you've got to put good, I mean, it used to be, and I've never been naive enough to think that either writers or musicians ever lived in this fantasy land where it's like, just be good and it all worked.
Right.
Someone had to do a lot of the back end. But talk us through, what were some of the learning curves you had as far as, I mean, you were not naive about how record labels work, but I imagine you learned some painful lessons pretty quickly about how nimble you had to be and how flexible and how smart and thick-skinned.
As far as the label itself.
Yeah, I mean, going from, I think we should do this to we're doing it.
Yeah. Yes. And I think a lot of the time, I mean, it has to be about 3 years from this time we started talking about it till when it actually happened. And for me, honestly, the biggest asset that we have, in my opinion, is our friendship, is my friendship with Chenier, because he's, we've been working together since 2000 when I moved here. And it really, to me, speaks to the power of like working with the right people, whether that's in a band or publishing or business or whatever, and how much of it is about working with the right people. And that's what John Zorn has always stressed to me. It's like, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what the instruments are. It's about the people. The right people will get you so far and help you get over those hurdles. But yeah, there was so much. I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you said that is in our mind, at least in my mind, I thought we were going to launch Chant and everybody was going to be like, this is amazing. Not everybody, but like everybody in my community.
Right.
And we had this festival when we decided we've done things that are like very ambitious and then sometimes have to like take a step back. Yeah. And there are many examples of that. But one was like, we had this Chant festival and I wrote this press release. And at that point I knew about, like, I had press contacts. I had some press coverage myself. A lot of it with Zion 80, some of it that you wrote, things like that. And that had been good. And I've always done my own promotion and marketing and stuff. But, I also found like one lesson was like, in terms of working with great people, like the fact that I've been associated with Zorn for so long, like has opened up many, many doors. And it's like, he's somebody that has has this really, really deep, reputation for having an insane amount of integrity, and he doesn't compromise, and like he doesn't work with people who aren't serious. And at first I was like, wow, I don't think I'm up for that. And he's like kicked my butt many, many times up until like we were in Europe with him like a year and a half ago, and we did a sound check at the first gig, and he was like, live show better be better than that. And I was like, I still get so nervous. Like, he's a close friend of mine. I've known him for like a third of my life. And I was like, uh-oh, it could all end. I could die on this stage right now, And then we ended up killing it. But he was like, he's like, I knew that would get you. Like, kind of playing with me, but whatever. Like, he knew that he had to say that to get me like to be on my best game.
Sure.
And it ended up being really fun, which is thankfully usually, not always, but usually the case. But so we had this festival. It was like a 4-night festival, very ambitious. We had like 12 bands over these 4 nights. And basically the festival was not very well attended. Okay. And we didn't get any press for the festival. And it just kind of, like, I can't say it flopped because, a gig is a gig, and like it helped me to see that the biggest, other than the people, the biggest lesson is like to build something on the scale that we're talking about. Like you're talking about, if we had $1 million and yada, yada, we could do all these things. But like, if you're starting kind of like grassroots and DIY and nobody's pushing you, nobody's helping you except you and your little community, it's going to be like baby steps, little by little by little by little. There's actually, I'll probably mention him a lot. I don't know if we've talked about him in other times that we've talked, because it's probably more recently that I discovered him, but there's a phenomenal kind of music business guru. Well, I call him a guru. I think he's younger than I am. His name is Ari Herstand, and he wrote a phenomenal book called How to Make It in the New Music Business. And it's like no BS. It's like, this is what you have to do. This is how much it costs. this is how much effort it takes. Don't do this because it's a waste of money. Do this, but it's going to be really hard.
Yep.
If you're going to get a real following on Twitter, let's say, it's going to be one person at a time. And it's going to take you like 18 months to do anything. And it's like, and he talks a lot about that, building up your audience one fan at a time. Yeah. And I still, to this day, I'm like, oh, maybe if I send out the tweet this way, it'll be viral. And and since I've started doing like music business education myself, like in the coronavirus when everybody was at home, I started teaching these online classes, which have been really great, and started doing more like consulting and stuff like that. And like that whole idea of like doing one little thing and it blowing up, I fall into that all the time. My advice to all artists is like, pretend that doesn't even exist. If it happens, that's great. But that's, and even like, do you know, what's his name? I just finished a book of his, Seth Godin.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's like, he says it in his Seth Godin way, better than I'm going to say it, but he's like wishing for, the virality of something. That's not a plan. That's like a wish. You need a plan. You need an actual plan. And the plan is hard, and it's going to take time and effort and sweat, but it actually can work if you do it right. And that's like with anything with chant. Like, I mean, thankfully I knew about the web design stuff. I didn't know really anything about the inner workings of like digital distribution. We signed up for and this is just like nuts and bolts. I'm sure there are analogs in the publishing world, but like we started working with this online digital distributor, who an individual artist can't put their music on Spotify. You need that, like you were talking, you need the middleman. Sure. You can put it up on Bandcamp and other places. Spotify, Apple Music, you can't. Yep. You need a distributor. And we signed up with a distributor who seemed great at first, until we started adding more artists. And we found out that the way they charge is by artist. So I can have one artist and 50 albums and it's very cheap. But if I have 50 artists, each with one album, it's like $800 a year.
Wow.
And like we still don't have that to spend. And that's too much money to spend for distribution. So it's like we had to scramble to find somebody else. And luckily I got hooked up with a great, distributor who only works with indie labels, and it's been amazing. But like, it was like a month of headaches. Like, oh man, like, what do we do? Do we not release it? Do we pay the extra money? It's little things like that, and that goes back to having the right partners. Because Shanir and I would be like, okay, I guess we'll put in another $200 this month, and then we really better figure it out. Right. But those are all learning experiences.
That's right.
So, and that is across the board.
And I think it's worth lingering for a moment on. I appreciate your whole comment on the virility, the virality, and that's what everyone wishes for. I think there's two components to that, right? You nailed it as far as like that's an aspiration, and it's very unlikely. But I think even the people that do go viral, it's usually a joke or something that by nature of what viral means, it's like evanescent and it goes away.
Yep.
I think it only actually proves, just despite social media and Twitter, it proves that you have to have something to sell. You have to have some quality. So even the overnight successes, and I think this definitely cuts across not only the artistic fields, but the sports world, like, people that suddenly are famous usually have worked hard for a really long time. So I think it's a hard lesson to learn, but I encourage everyone that's paying attention to this what Jon is saying is there's always been the guidebooks and the good Samaritans out there that genuinely are trying to help other artists, but there's a lot of good resources out there, a lot of them free, that definitely didn't exist when Jon and I were younger. So take advantage of that. But I do want to get into more nuts and bolts about chant, but I think you brought up something else, Jon, that is really important and really resonates not only with a lot of the stuff that we talk about at 1455, but really the impetus for me trying to start this organization, which is this notion of, especially with writers, it's such a solitary endeavor most of the time. And I think certain types are striving for success by whatever means necessary. but a lot of other ones that have been in it for a long time come to recognize they genuinely love fellow artisans and want to lift other boats up, because they do recognize, cliche be damned, that proverb of a rising tide is absolutely true. And I want to, again, celebrate. I've watched you become a champion and a hero for your fellow artists. And I think, that's one of the secrets of a happy life, but it does require this community investment, and you need to be a part of the community to take advantage of the community. And I think you paid it forward in that regard.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's by other people paying it forward to me that I've kind of had the inspiration, to do that, for sure. Yeah.
So I guess, but to put a fine point on what I just said, you've I know it's a labor of love, and I know it's very gratifying, but let's brass tacks. You've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into helping other people's music see the light of day, and you're a musician yourself. I just think for the 21st century, for a lot of people, even in the artistic world, that's an anathema. Like, but he's an artist. He doesn't have time. It's like, it's all becomes a part of a lifestyle to a certain extent, I think.
Yes, it does. Yes. And it's also, it's always important. I mean, Shanir has told me this many times when we've talked. I'm like, man, it's so busy, and I'm doing this and that, and I don't have time for my own music. I've said, I've gotten into that many times. I mean, as recent as, like within this coronavirus time, like at first I was like, okay, well, I have more time now because I don't have to like commute into my day job. But then I find that like if I have an hour, I'm just spending it on like doing champ business work. And he has said to me several times, whoa, like, you're a musician first. You serve our community better by being a musician first. I don't want it to be 5 years down the road and you haven't put your own projects forward. And I see he has fallen into that too, because he wants to help other musicians. I'm like, man, you have all these great projects. Like, let's put some of them out. That's part of the reason that the label exists, is to serve the community. We're not looking at the community from external to it. We're in it. That's exactly right. What you just said. Sure. But it's hard to find that balance, because there's always more that you can do in any area. And it's very, very important to have to be organized and to kind of know what your priorities are for the day, and how that goes to the larger picture. So like I have an album, a Zion 80 remix album that I'm working on, and I put it off for a long time, and I was like, no, that's 6 weeks ago, I kind of had this I kind of woke up and I was like, I have to put this record out.
Right.
So that's all to say that it's always a challenge. A balance has to be constantly maintained. That's right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But to me, it's been natural to I've always had some sense of the business side of it. Of music. Like, even like my first band, I was the guy that would like figure out how to where to get the tapes copied and go to Kinko's and photocopy them. And I still have in my mind how to cut out an 8.5 by 11 paper so it fits in a cassette, shell. We used to do that all the time. Yeah. So, and this is like an extension of that. But yeah, it's really important. And I think I try to tell musicians all the time, I use an example of Jessica Lurie, who's in Zion 80, and maybe I don't know if you wrote something on her or maybe just know her from Zion 80.
I certainly have acknowledged her brilliant work in Zion 80.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. So, and I've brought her up as an example in this a lot, but everybody has something that they can bring to their community that's a little bit from the side or a little bit different. I mean, yeah, we're artists, and that's the most important thing. That's great. But also anytime I hang out with Jessica, and unfortunately I haven't seen her in person in a while, but when we would play gigs somewhere, she'd be she's always telling me about a festival person or a musician I should get in touch with to get a gig in Paris or Vienna or whatever. And that's because she's a road warrior. She does that all the time with her band, the Tiptons. She's always on the road with them. Okay. So she, to me, is she's the road warrior who knows everybody in all different places, and she's going to connect you. But then when her website crashes, she calls me. And I love her as a friend, and I would love her either way. But the fact that she thinks to tell me, oh, you should contact this person. I'm going to send you their email. This person, get in touch with her, whatever. It makes me more enthusiastic to be like, of course, just send me the information. I'll fix your website. You know, like the service of the community is so important.
Yeah, I mean, you know, not for nothing, but, you know, our mission statement at 1455 is celebrating creativity and building community. And I think there's a lot of ways to break it down, but I think what we're talking about is not just these platitudes, but how this informs the work. It keeps the community, you know, alive and engaged. But I think on balance, and speaking of balance, I couldn't agree more, you know, on a lot of levels. But I think in terms of that balance, being surrounded by or being more surrounded by stimulus of other creatives is always inspiring. And then it just gets down to, well, you can sleep when you die. Because I do think there's an element too of you. And I look at John Zorn, right? Like I'm as inspired as John Zorn, if not more, than any writer that I follow. In part because writers, you know, I'm sure like musicians, there's similarities and differences. Mm-hmm. But the ones that are different are really different. And I look at these superhuman productivity, and you just if you can't be inspired and intimidated by that, you know, I just think some people will be intimidated to the point of paralysis, and some people will find that motivating. And I find it ceaselessly motivating because it gives me no excuse. If someone like John Zorn at his level of success can still be cranking it out like he's got something to prove like a rookie, how dare I get an extra 2 hours of sleep?
Yep. I heard a great interview the other day with Lin-Manuel Miranda talking about Hamilton. Yeah. And I haven't seen the show, actually. I have to watch it with my kids on Disney Plus now that it's available. Yep. But, you know, some friends of ours are really into it. They like memorize the whole thing. But I just caught a little bit of an interview with him, and he was talking about how Hamilton, as a person, he felt this like weight on himself of all that needed to be done, and that like inspired him and lifted him up, and he, you know, slept after he was killed in that duel. But that he was motivated and emboldened by it. But Burr, I don't even remember what Burr's first name is, so it's my history class. Aaron Burr saw the same thing of the world, but he was paralyzed by it. And that's like this, the dynamic between them. And that Manuel Miranda is really inspired by Hamilton's, he's inspired by his being inspired by the fire that was like lit in him. Right. And he was talking about how they filmed the version that's actually the movie was like, they were on Broadway and they did like, you know, they did their shows and then they did the show all night that they filmed, and then the audience came the next day and they did like 2 days of shows with all, like 3 runs of the show for the cameras in between. And I was like, wow. Like that's like Zorn calling me and be like, hey man, I just wrote 300 new songs. I'm like, what are you talking about? He just always.
Yep.
Amazing.
And those are the people flying really close to the sun. But I think it also is important to note that being again, for those of us that can be in very solitary endeavors, especially in these times, that's the other huge benefit of being around community, aside from the solidarity, is that it's motivating in a very positive way. And you know, you pick the right community. And I found, you know, with the community that I've both grown and gravitated toward, is that most of those people tend to be generous. Most of those people tend to be sensitive, and there's not a lot of competition. There's, in fact, the opposite. There's a lot of people that want to help each other, and that is contagious.
Yeah, 100%.
So talk a little. So you've gone from you're a guru of sorts yourself, right? Like you are a consultant now. Talk a little bit about how that evolved. Like you're not just helping people via the label, which is remarkable, but you're helping people. Talk a little bit about how that came about.
That's like, again, it's the thing of how I got into some of that in the first place is, and even I guess the music, I feel like it's like, it almost, sometimes these things happen like, not because of our effort, but almost despite our effort. Like, I'll say a tangent because I was just talking about it the other day. but I will tie it back and it won't be too long. But so when Rashanim's first album came out in 2000, we recorded it in 03 and it came out in 04. We were living in Brooklyn, and my wife and I started going to a synagogue there, and it was Brooklyn, so Mark Rebo belonged to that synagogue. And, you know, Mark Dresser, who's I don't know if you know him, he's a tremendous bass player. I think he teaches at Cal Arts now. Okay. He lives in California as far as I know, but he's tremendous. And I would like see him in the back there. And I got up the courage to approach him one day. And then I gave him a CD. And, you know, in my mind, I was like, okay, I've like kind of like taken the first step into like the big leagues. Cause I was like, oh, hey, I put this out on, you know, Zorn put this out. And he was like, oh, great. You know, tell John I said hi. And like, I'm like in this gang now that I've wanted to be in, you know, since I was in high school. And then a couple weeks later, Dresser comes back. I mean, he's a sweetheart, like you said, very generous, sensitive guy. I've seen him play many times, phenomenal musician. And I think I'm there being like I'm on Zorn's label. I'm the avant-garde guy. I've arrived. Like I'm, you know, I'm like, you know, sophisticated, you know, jazz, Jewish, avant-garde, whatever. And then he comes, whatever, I see him a couple weeks later, and he's like, hey man, I listened to your CD. It's great. You know what? It really reminds me of the Ventures, you know, surf rock. Yeah. And I was like devastated. I was told, my wife was like, what? Did he say something mean to you? Like, he's like, I just was like, no, I'm just like a rock, like moron. No, I'm just saying it because that's what's in my head. I mean, you know, Jimi Hendrix was not a rock moron. Jimmy Page is not a rock moron. But like, I have this idea of myself, sure. But somehow, despite that, something else comes out. And then it's only been in the years that I've been able to like embrace the fact that like, yeah, I love surf rock. And like, maybe that's a great sound. And kind of like letting yourself be who you are in a deep way and not imposing. I mean, it's a lesson for life, I guess, relationships, everything, not imposing this thing. I need to be like this. It's more like discovering who you are and then being able to emanate that. So like with Zion 80, when I started it, a lot of it was like, oh, I'm writing songs that are like not, you know, several people were like, oh, the music is kind of like simple. And that would have like put me in a very bad, that would have like triggered me big time. Like simple. What are you talking about? Like, I'm like 14 and like, I don't know anything and like living like, you know, still like living with my parents. But, you know, but like, I'm like, yeah, it's trance music. Trance music is, you know, listen to Fela. It's one chord for 40 minutes and it's the most beautiful thing in the world. Like, but that's an expression of me. It's not me trying to be sophisticated. It's just me being me. And I found with the technology stuff, despite myself, because at the beginning I didn't know anything about this, but like I enjoy it. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the problem solving aspects. I enjoy the whole thing that like people go through in order to create something like, you know, WordPress, like you know, the web development platform, or social media from the technical aspect. And I found that I gravitate towards that. And then literally in the coronavirus, you know, when this was happening, like every musician I talked to was like, man, I lost all these gigs. And I mean, I lost a few myself. I'm, as much as I am down on myself for having a day job sometimes, I was like, wow, thank God that I didn't have like a tour lined up, that was my family's income for the next month. Sure. But I know a lot of people who were in that position and are still in that position. And then one day I was like, oh, maybe I could like help musicians like up their online game with, you know, promoting on Bandcamp and getting on Spotify playlists and strengthening their email list and you know, getting some better design. So I started doing these online workshops and I found the interest was really there. And then people have started to call me for like individual consulting work. And it's only like, this is what I have experience in. I like it. I enjoy teaching it. I enjoy empowering artists and musicians. And there's a financial aspect. I charge for it. I try to charge reasonably. Sure. But also the whole like art and money thing, I think it's very easy for artists to get into, to absorb the idea that we shouldn't be paid fairly for our work. And that's complete nonsense. You know? probably 20 years ago, I would have been like, well, it's this and it's that. And it was like, no, I'm 46 years old. You know, like I have 3 kids. Like, right. I think that people should be paid fairly for their work, period. And I don't, you know, have any negative view of somebody who is like paid well and deserves that and whatever. Like, and I don't think we should complain about like, oh, this pop star gets millions of dollars. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, right. You're in charge of your own thing. You got to get your own thing in order. But I also found like people were happy to pay for it because they felt it was of value. And just like the art, if you're like putting it on Amazon and it's like no good, but if you have something that you really believe in and you can get it out there and put it on Amazon and people will read it, and then like you get some skills with marketing, it's like, yeah, you're using marketing and sales techniques, but what they get is really of value. Like that's a lot of what Seth Godin talks about that has really resonated with me. That, you know, underneath it all, like with the final product, like you get the thing in the mail and it's like, oh, this is beautiful. I love this. I want to see what else this person is doing. You know, exactly. We're not like tricking people into paying. We're like, no. You know, but the selling part can be, I mean, you know, like it can be so uncomfortable for artists, but like we have to embrace it and embrace doing it in a genuine way.
And I think right at the end of the day, doing something with integrity is its own kind of both reward and motivation. But yeah, obviously, I think we both know, and not just our own work, but the work we love, and from decades ago to today, there's so many brilliant artists out there that are really doing it the right way that are never going to make commensurate to their skills. So shame on any of us if we're willing to accept that and not go down without a fight. You know, and by fight, I just basically mean with a, you know, a little bit of drive and a little bit of savvy and a willingness to learn from others, you give yourself a fighting chance. Yes. You know, so in a sense, of course, I'm talking about Rage Against the Machine, but I'm not even really talking about revolutionary attitudes. I'm talking about, you know, the system's always been rigged. And you said this early on. The labels way before Napster, right? The labels were a disaster for artists going way back, just like, you know, sports owners. Like the system's always been unfair, but we do have, at least these days, there's at least a chance to rise above some of those, you know, inequities and make something of it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's so important. And I've had conversations with people about this, some in my own band, because they're like, Spotify, like that's like, you are part of the problem if you're paying Spotify, which I hear that. But then at some point, as you say, like, if you want to fight against them, that's noble. If you believe in that, that's great. Mm-hmm. I don't think if you're going to do that and still be a musician at the same time, like if you're going to bring Spotify down and make it fair for musicians, that's like 4 full-time jobs, if not 400 full-time jobs.
That's right.
And you still might never win, which sounds kind of defeatist. But to me, I have always resonated towards people. I've resonated with people who like kind of, like you said, like use the system against the system in a way. And it's not even about the system to me. It's about creating and surviving and thriving as an artist and doing something to make the world better. And to some people, bringing down the system is how you make the world better. And that's fine. That's not how I think. But I remember when I first heard about, like, I mean, I can think of so many examples, like Henry Rollins, to me, is somebody who, I mean, his work ethic is incredible. And I've heard many, many interviews with him, so I don't remember which one, but he's like, yeah, if I get a call to do a voiceover for like a TV commercial, sure. Because then it allows me to put out another one of my books that's not going to make a lot of money. Or do this or that. He's like, I always want to be working and I always want to be furthering what I'm doing, whether it's music or writing, voiceover. I mean, he does so many different things and he's such a role model in that. And he's not sitting there, you know, he might be complaining against one thing or another, but he's out there working like really, really hard.
Yep.
You know,
listen,
and that's,
you know, the artistic game's a hustle, life's a hustle.
100%.
And I think it's a sucker's game, right? For anyone that thinks that to have integrity, you need to automatically limit yourself. There's such a fine line. I think people that are proceeding with integrity need not worry about selling out, because to sell out, you have to have to sell, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't think any jazz musicians or poets are in any danger of selling out, because
Right.
that would involve the masses,
Totally.
wanting a piece of it.
Yeah, totally. And honestly, like I see Zorn as a mentor for me in so many ways, in addition to being a good friend. My best, my most impactful conversations about like finances and money have been with him.
I'll bet.
He's like, he gave me a talking to after I came back from my first tour in Europe. He's like, and I don't think you would mind me saying this. He like literally pulled me aside. I was doing a gig with him like a couple weeks after I got back. I was like on cloud 9 from having like toured in Europe. And he's like, Shanir told me what you guys got paid. And he knew at that point I had my oldest, who's now 15, and my second son was on the way. And he's like, you can't do that again. You better charge more or don't go. You deserve to get paid well. And you have a family to support. I have seen how this goes, and it's bad. It's very bad. And if you do it right, you're young enough that you can make it work. But do not ever go out for that little money again. And I was like, what do you mean? I made $200. It was amazing. It was more than that, but like not much more. You know? Like I didn't lose money. And he's kind of like, man, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
Don't take something just because somebody offers it to you. Like think about it.
And I think there's hope, right? I do. I think we did live through what I call, there's probably a million different analogs, but the Huffington Post model, where for writers anyway, it was, no, but there's no pay. We used to pay writers, but you're going to get this exposure.
Exposure bucks.
That's played out, and for the good reasons. I do think that there's gradually, we're able to kind of reclaim some of this space. And I think this conversation we're having and this event proves that, despite some really heavy times that we're all, as a society, as a world, dealing with, what I've found a lot of comfort in, John, is that, again, like this festival is proof of you shift and you use the technology that's available and you actually maybe connect with even more people. But what I think by we, I mean the artistic world, and not even for bad reasons, but I believe that we tended to cede the world of webinars and the world of technology to the business world, because that's just how it's done. And what I think has been really empowering about these last few months is that musicians, much less writers, have seen, you can't and shouldn't try to approximate the vibe and the energy of a live. And I don't think that's ever going to change. We'll get past this. But in the meantime, why are people in cubicles having webinars? Why can't we do art and music? Again, it's not a replacement, but it's an evolution. I'd be curious what you're seeing in your communities, and both as a stopgap, but I believe going forward, it's going to be a hybrid model, and that's a good thing. We're never going to go back. It's in person or it doesn't happen. I think we're seeing there's something to be said about, and I know I talk to writers that are like, I'm in my pajamas or I'm naked from the waist down. It's like, yeah, you don't have to leave your house, and you can make money doing that. What are you seeing in your world, in your peers?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, that started was people just doing like concerts from home, which is great. And maybe people, getting like tips or setting up some kind of payment model for that. Like you're talking about, maybe being naked from the waist out. That would work. Like some instruments it would work and some it wouldn't. Yeah, like I reached out to, I work with Frank London a lot, and we had some really nice conversations at the beginning of this. And he's like, I'm going to just find a bunch of people and like make these videos. And he was asking me like, how do you do the split screen in iMovie? And that was awesome because it's him in an admittedly unfamiliar terrain being like, no, I'm home. I'm not playing all my gigs are canceled, but I have a tremendous community. Frank's been at it for a long time, and he's a genius musician. And then I see he's like putting out all these videos, and it was great. Michael Winograd, I don't know if you know him. He was another person that started to embrace it, and he would make these like kind of coronavirus related, quarantine related songs. And I think one of them, he actually was wearing a suit and then boxer shorts just to to play on that. And he put he's a great musician and also has a great sense of humor. So that's one thing. And I've only actually done one online gig. It was back in May. And it actually was like really, I tried not to look at it as a replacement for a live gig, but as I'm playing and people commented, some people left tips, a few people said like, oh, I was making dinner and I just had it on and it was great. And that really like, it had some of the benefits of a live show. You know, like I set up I put like different lights in my basement and made it look nice and things like that. And another thing for me, I've used it as an opportunity to work on recording projects that I'm working on. In kind of my home studio, which has been awesome. That's been my biggest focus, which has been great. It hasn't been really kind of public facing because they're new projects, but working on a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out. And then I did these classes on Zoom and just charged people like on PayPal a little bit of money, and those were great. One of them was in collaboration with Asylum Arts, which is this Jewish arts organization based in New York, which was great. And then actually technologically, the most exciting thing I saw, I participated in, I don't even remember what his name was, but Louis Marks is the head of Rope-A-Dope Records, and he's been a tremendously generous, helping us, giving us advice with chant. And I was on a call with him and some other people about the state of technology. And then from that, there's a DJ, jazz DJ named Simon Renter. He sent an email out after that saying, we're going to have a live in-person performance between two musicians who are in different locations.
Yeah.
And that's... Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like you can't do it on Zoom because of the delay. We can have this conversation, but if we were playing together, there's a delay. Somebody figured this out, which is unbelievable. I mean, talk about necessity being the mother of invention, or like when you get squeezed, some great, the diamond comes out when you get squeezed. They figured out how to do this. It's like fiber optic or something. And there were two musicians. It was great. I don't remember the piano player's name. I'm blanking on it, but Jorge Roeder is the bass player, who's a tremendous musician. And they were literally playing in time in two different locations. And I was completely blown away. And it was so exciting,
I just think that there's whole new vistas. And I think as we move forward, what we're looking at is the world's expanding and the opportunities therefore for innovation and collaboration. There's just barriers are being dropped, and I think there's tremendous opportunity there. It's always going to be a challenge, but I like having a fighting chance to get the art out there and to build these communities. I think what we're talking about literally is bridging this gap even between the literary and musical, because there shouldn't be a gap. There shouldn't be a divide there. But we all can and should be spreading that knowledge and spreading that awareness and not looking at these siloed, and building that community. So as usual with us, so parting shot till we speak again, what are we looking for from you in the next months or year? Any big projects in the works? Anything you want to lay on us as a sneak preview?
Yeah, sure. Well, Chant Records is continuing and growing, and we're putting out music, and people can check out chantrecords.com. That's kind of the home base for everything. Sign up for the mailing list and whatever. Yes. There is a project that I'm very excited about that's happening very soon, imminently, hopefully, a collaboration that I'm doing with a great poet, actually, an MC named Eden Pearlstein, who's based in New York. We have a band. We did a record, and we're, going to be putting that out soon, most likely on Chant. I have a solo project that I'm working on, which is kind of like, which was happening already, but thankfully it's, that's the most coronavirus friendly type of band, is just one person. But I'll be putting some of that music out too. And also, as I mentioned, a Zion 80 remix album with actually some Chant artists doing remixes of Zion 80 songs, which is my kind of Afrobeat Jewish jazz band, but reconfigured. So
Phenomenal.
I'm keeping busy. Yeah.
You are. Well, that's all we can ask for, and that's all we want. So, folks, chantrecords.com, check it out, and I want to thank you, as always, for being you, for the beautiful music that you bring into the world. I've told you many times you've made my life better, immeasurably. But also, thank you for being someone that is showing how it can be done to live this balanced life and build community and raise many boats with this tide of love.
Man, thank you. It's my pleasure. Likewise, 100%.
Well, thanks for being with us. And folks, this is being recorded, so we're gonna put this on the website. You'll be able to see it and share it. Please do that. And again, please check out chantrecords.com. Jon, thanks for being with us, brother. And
thank you.
I'll catch you outside.
Okay.